Luke 9:37 to 56, and we're following on from Jesus' disciples seeing Jesus transfigured, an amazing, overwhelming experience. What happens next? The next day when they came down from the mountain, a large crowd met him, that's Jesus. A man in the crowd called out, "Teacher, I beg you to look at my son, for he is my only child." The spirit seizes him and he suddenly screams. It throws him into convulsions so he foams at the mouth. It scarcely ever leaves him and is destroying him. I begged your disciples to drive it out, but they could not. "You unbelieving and perverse generation," Jesus replied, "how long shall I stay with you and put up with you? Bring your son here." Even while the boy was coming, the demon threw him to the ground in a convulsion. But Jesus rebuked the impure spirit, healed the boy, and gave him back to his father. And they were all amazed at the greatness of God. Let's just pause there. This is a tragic story, isn't it? This poor man, as he watches this demon destroying his son, and the devastation it causes, and longing for help, and he goes to Jesus' disciples and they've not been able to help. What's the problem? Well, Jesus says it's an unbelieving generation, a perverse generation. Who's he addressing? It's difficult, isn't it? Because it seems to be the failure of his disciples, but also the wider population. But it's unbelief here that's causing an issue. It's the lack of trust in God to intervene, perhaps the lack of faith in Christ to be able to step in. Is that the issue? We're not really told, but it's the first of a series of events that shows that the weakness and failing of the disciples. The glorious thing is that Jesus does step in. He rebukes the spirit, and it's a lovely phrase, isn't it? He healed the boy and gave him back to his father. The father's lost him to this demonic spirit for so long, and now he receives him back whole and healthy. And what a treasured moment that must be. And everyone's amazed at the greatness of God. This is what Jesus has meant when he said there's an unbelief that they've not seen. Perhaps they've been too fearful of the demon, believing that God is not powerful enough to deal with this. I don't know. But while everyone's still amazed at that and marveling at what Jesus did, he says to his disciples, "Listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you. The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men." But they did not understand what this meant. It was hidden from them, so that they did not grasp it, and they were afraid to ask him about it. So there's a bit that's not their fault here. It's hidden from them that Jesus is going to be handed over to men. They cannot see this. There's a spiritual inability to grasp its meaning. But the failure perhaps is that they're too afraid to ask him about it. Too afraid to acknowledge their ignorance. Too afraid to acknowledge that only he knows. That's got to be pride, hasn't it? Too afraid to ask Jesus. So lacking trust that God can deal with this demon-possessed boy. Too afraid, too proud perhaps to ask for help on something they don't understand. Let's read on. An argument started among the disciples as to which of them would be the greatest. Jesus, knowing their thoughts, took a little child and made him stand beside him. Then he said to them, "Whoever welcomes this little child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. For it is the one who is least among you all who is the greatest." So now here's another problem. They're arguing over who's the best. Continuation of pride, isn't it? Arguing over who's the greatest, who's the most important, who's the most significant. And Jesus says, well, you want to know about the greatest? Whoever welcomes this little child in my name welcomes me. And it's about being the least to be the greatest. It's being the servant of all. It's loving everyone else. That's what greatness looks like. And so the disciples have missed the mark again. And before we even get a chance to catch breath, Master said, "John, we saw someone driving out demons in your name, and we tried to stop him because he's not one of us." "Do not stop him," Jesus said, "for whoever is not against you is for you." So here's this arguing over who's the greatest, their pride in not being willing to ask, and now John is defensive of their exclusive relationship with Jesus, and someone else is casting out demons in Jesus' name, and they tried to stop him. He's not one of them. This tribalism, this parochialism, this power grab almost. And Jesus says, don't stop him. He's not against you. He's for you. He's on our team. As the time approached for him to be taken up to heaven, Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem, and he sent messengers on ahead who went into a Samaritan village to get things ready for him. But the people there did not welcome him because he was heading for Jerusalem. When the disciples, James and John, saw this, they asked, "Lord, do you want us to call down fire down from heaven to destroy them?" But Jesus turned and rebuked them. Then he and his disciples went to another village. So again, the disciples thinking power and control, and here Jesus is not being received by this Samaritan village because they're aware that he's going on to Jerusalem. That means he's part of the Jewish crowd, and they're not willing, they're resistant to a Jew stopping in their village on the way, and the disciples want to call down fire from heaven. And Jesus refuses, he rebukes them. So much misunderstanding by the disciples as to the nature of who Jesus is and what his kingdom looks like and what being a follower of Jesus looks like. But these are all recorded because actually they are a mirror to our own sinful nature. They are a reflection of what we are like by nature. Thankfully, if we're following Jesus, we've been given a new heart and new desires to be more like him. But actually these incidents with the disciples show what we're like. People in church can be after power. Church leaders, sadly, can abuse power. We can think about being great in terms of being prominent and noticed and all of those things. We can be against anyone who doesn't quite line up with us, and we want to command them to stop. We can be against those who are not receptive to Jesus at the moment, and we want judgment to fall on their hearts. We're frustrated with them. Jesus' kingdom is so different. Jesus' kingdom looks like taking up a cross and denying self and loving others, and the disciples don't get it at that moment, and our sinful nature does not get this, is not happy with this. And so we have to, as Paul calls us to, put it to death. We have to, as the New Testament letters continually encourage us to, walk in step with the Spirit. The fruit of the Spirit is very, very different to this. Gentleness and kindness and self-control. So this is a good challenge for us today. How are we doing in our discipleship? Are we believing the greatness of God, believing the ability of Jesus? Are we emulating his lifestyle, the lifestyle of the King, as we follow him in his kingdom? Let's ask Jesus' help by his Spirit to live